Conversations across time. 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 Conversations across time.
Good evening. I'm Mark Hoffman, retired history teacher and a proud member of the Conversations Across Time family. Tonight's panel, compiled by host Vivian Crawford and co-host Babette Joseph, includes Bass Reeves, first United States African American Deputy Marshal. Mr. Reeves was born a slave, lived with the Seminole and Cherokee Indians, apprehended almost 3,000 felons, and is said to be the inspiration for the fictional character, the Lone Ranger. John D. Rockefeller, a robber baron. Robber barons were captains of industry at the turn of the 19th century. He used unscrupulous tactics to form the Standard Oil monopoly. And J. Edgar Hoover, the founder of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Mr. Hoover was the director of the FBI through 6 presidential administrations, from Franklin Delano Roosevelt to Richard Nixon. Hoover used unscrupulous tactics and formed dossiers, especially for famous Americans like Martin Luther King and John Kennedy. Watch this exciting debate as Rockefeller is exposed for the greedy businessman he is, Hoover's hypocrisy is unmasked, and Marshal Reeves discusses Black Lives Matter.
Good evening. Welcome once again to Conversations Across Time, the show that allows you, the viewer, to imagine what it would be like if we got people together from differing time periods. Hopefully you're going to enjoy tonight's gathering. Seated to my left, as always, is Conversations Across Time co-host Babette Joseph. And Babette's been with us since the beginning of the show, so everyone knows who she is. We rely on Babette to ask the hard questions.
That's right.
Thank you, Babette. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Seated to my right is Bass Reeves. Welcome, Mr. Reeves. I should say, welcome, Marshal Reeves.
Either's fine.
Seated next to Marshal Reeves is Mr. J. Edgar Hoover. Seated next to Mr. Hoover is Mr. John D. Rockefeller. Welcome, Mr. Rockefeller.
Thank you.
So I want to begin tonight by asking you, Mr. Rockefeller, in 1862, when you founded Standard Oil, your partners were your brother and another gentleman that you ended up deciding you didn't want to do business with anymore in 1865. Now, I guess what I'd like to know is what was in your mind when you first founded Standard Oil?
Well, the obvious thing is to make money.
Of course.
That was the first thing. Second thing is to supply a need where we could make money. And fortunately for us, we did. We were, at that point in time, honest and above board.
You were honest?
We were honest and above board. And when we took our partners in, we created what we thought was a mutual trust. And we went on from there.
Another word for corporation, trust.
Well, right, and we had 30 people in it. Everybody was from Cleveland, as it happened.
When you first founded Standard Oil, it was for purposes of power for lighting because kerosene was your big product.
Exactly.
And so what I found particularly interesting in getting ready for this show was the fact that kerosene was your initial product and that gasoline was sort of a byproduct that you it was in the way. You didn't know what to do with it at the time. And of course, we know what happened later to make gasoline become the paramount source of your wealth. So, Mr. Rockefeller, in 1862, you founded the Standard Oil Trust. Can you tell us something about what you and your partners at the time, I believe your brother and a Mr. Flagler, what were you thinking at the time?
Well, we were looking for something to invest in that obviously people wanted and needed. And when we discovered kerosene, because we already were involved indirectly with the refinement of kerosene, and we realized that most of the lamps in this country were powered by kerosene. There was no, gasoline wasn't effective at that time. It wasn't even an item to be seen with. And we decided when we bought 2 operating oil refineries in Cleveland, then the major oil refinery center of the country, we incorporated under a charter issued by the state of Ohio, and we called the business the Standard Oil Company.
Now,
And
I'm sorry. I wanted to just ask you, when you said you called it the Standard Oil Company, had you, and was that your decision or was that the decision of you and your partners collectively?
I would say it was a mutual decision.
Okay.
We obviously, we agreed on a name. Somehow or other we all contributed to it because none of us really took the name in toto at the time.
Okay.
We refined it and that's what we came up with, like any business.
So that your major customers at the time, just so our audience is clear about that, when one says that they're selling kerosene, you know, we typically think of the individual consumer. But your business, I think the genius of your business acumen was that you ended up selling to cities that needed to have street lights.
Well, it was a product that was universal in those days, much like gasoline is today. And we decided that we wanted to market it to everybody without any prejudice. That if you had one house and 6 lamps or whatever industry that involved the making or the using of kerosene for power, we decided we wanted to be in that business. It developed into a very, very, very large business. Remember, kerosene predated gasoline.
Yes.
And if you think in today's terms of how important gasoline is to our economy and to our way of life, that was what kerosene did in those days.
Sure.
So we decided we're going to do it. We made a profit on it. We were delighted to do it. We got rid of a lot of competitors.
And that's, maybe we just slow down there for one moment, because in terms of getting rid of your competitors, that's one of the things that we think about when we think of John D. Rockefeller, early days of John D. Rockefeller. We think about unfair competition. And in getting ready for tonight, one of the things that came up in the green room is we were talking about a comparison between Standard Oil and Walmart.
We see that happen in the modern world. I'm thinking of cable companies.
Not the way it was then. Then it was more narrow. You either use kerosene or you use nothing.
Well,
and it was a question of who could give the best price, the best delivery, and it was still competitive. We tried to buy as many of our competitors.
But the government did not control you at all, and you could do anything you like, and
well,
you
that was
did.
a different government. Walmart's the same way, by the way. The government doesn't control Walmart. And the fact is that Walmart, while it's a major, major, major entity in the department store business, they have competition as well.
But I hear what you're saying about the competition, but you see, our notion of you and your history has to do with you. For instance, let's talk about the Cleveland Massacre, where, I mean, for the benefit of the audience, so that they'll understand, Cleveland was the center of refinery.
Right.
So that's where the refineries centered, and you essentially misled your competitors by saying, let's strike a deal with the railroads, and we'll strike a deal with the railroads, and they'll have to give us all cheaper prices because no one will be shipping on the railroads, and they'll give us better prices.
Well, that's a good business procedure. I mean, that
also
happens today. You mentioned Walmart.
Now I believe that would be against the law because the government...
It wasn't against the law then.
Exactly.
Okay.
But the government wised up.
Right,
And
except,
today's Republicans are trying to take us back to your day, which I would resist.
well, I would think we would all resist, including me, by the way. The thing is that it's a game.
Okay.
I have what the public wants. I have to have it delivered. It happens to be the transportation costs are a large part of the retail price. If you buy in
Any
China
product.
Any
or Japan
products.
or Mexico,
Okay.
it
Any
costs
product.
money to come into the
Food, the manufactured products,
Right.
minerals, whatever.
And the product, or the cost of transportation, is not a net price. They add on to their markup onto the cost of transportation like they do any other made of the garment.
Right, and the
And
consumer
that's what
plays.
happens. And the same thing happened to me in the kerosene business. Why would I be stupid enough to pay more money than somebody else, or even as much money, if I'm the largest shipper of kerosene in the country? Why would I pay as much as my competition? Why? It doesn't make business sense.
No, but I understand that. And on that level, as you explain it, as you are very, very good with words, as you are able to articulate it now, it sounds like that's good business sense.
Right.
But the problem is with the Cleveland massacre is that you went to your competitors and said, let's all get together, say to the railroads, none of us are going to use you for shipping. We'll just build a pipeline. We have already started a pipeline. Therefore, give us a better rate. But once the railroads conceded and agreed to give you a better rate, that wasn't passed on to your competitors. In other words, the cooperation that you were saying that was going to
Why
exist
should it be?
Because
Why
you
should
have
it have been passed on?
Because you have consumers who need your product in order to survive in most of the climates of this country.
But you realize that the railroads are also run by business people.
I
Okay?
understand that this
And
is a
if you-
point the
if I'm-
government has to intervene on behalf of the consumers.
If I'm
That's
shipping
what I
1,000,000
understand.
gallons of kerosene a day, and my competitor is shipping 20,000, why should I pay as much as him?
No, and I
Or
agree
him
with
as
you.
much as me?
But Mr. Rockefeller, I agree with that principle. But what I think you are being very cunning in not explaining here is that you got all of your competitors together and said, we're going to cooperate, and we're going to say to the railroads that none of us are going to ship product in order to get a better price. And when you got the better price, that better price, you then went to all of your competitors and said to them, look, I can get my oil shipped for this amount of dollars. You'll have to pay more. So therefore, that was inducement for them selling to you at bargain prices. I mean, that's the subterfuge that was used.
I don't see anything wrong with that.
Well, if you're a consumer, you might, because the person at the end who pays for your business acumen is the woman who needs kerosene to heat her miserable little hovel where she lives and give her some light so her children can study after dark to go to school. That's who the government needs to protect, and that's who the government tried to protect with the Sherman Antitrust Act, and which, as I said before, the Republicans are now trying to take apart. You talk to me about makes business sense. I'm talking to you about the consumer, the American
It's not my
citizen.
civic responsibility to worry about about the consumer.
No, and
my
then-
responsibility is to my shareholders and the people
Exactly
who
right.
work for us.
That's why you
and who
need
are
to be controlled by the
We
government.
paid them more money than the standard price in the
No
industry.
question you paid your employees more.
We passed on much of the savings as we could, and
To your shareholders.
Because the title of this show is Charades and Masquerades. And this Charades and Masquerades. And here we are listening to a charade. But before we go any further with that, what I'd like to ask is, we've got two lawmen on this panel. Now, it seems to me, and I think Babette's probably explained it, what your business practices would be criminal today. I'm just wondering if either one of our law enforcement people on this panel see any problem with the business practices that you use.
May I point out at this time that
I see nothing wrong with what Mr. Rockefeller has done. What Mr. Rockefeller is doing is simply
The
building
American
up,
way.
excuse me, I'm talking, building up this country, whereas I have been dedicating my life to arresting the radicals and anarchists like I see around here who are trying to tear down this country. In my day, when I was growing up, people knew their place and they kept their mouths shut and they respected the authority that was given to them, like Mr. Rockefeller. Men like Mr. Rockefeller were respected, and we criminalize them now.
Well,
Good Lord.
excuse me, Mr.
Thank
Hoover.
you.
I mean, I asked, and you're sitting next to a lawman who arrested a lot of outlaws in his day, and I guess it's just
Bunch of two big cattle rustlers. Big deal. I took on serious criminals and anarchists and radicals that were trying to tear down
And
this
teachers,
country.
elementary school teachers, I know.
Who are passing around
people who went
who are
to
passing around communist ideas.
people
might I
who
point out.
went to discussion groups. Yeah, I know, very dangerous. I
Well,
noticed how
Some people
dangerous
get
they
pretty
were.
susceptible to crazy radical ideas. We
Like
gotta keep it out of
yourself.
their minds.
Like yourself.
Excuse me?
I want to ask a question since you mentioned the word passing.
What about passion?
Well, Mr. Hoover, first of all, we know that you targeted African Americans. You
Jews,
targeted Jews. You targeted gay people.
homosexuals.
Yes, I think that's what you refer to as homosexuals.
I have worse words for them.
We don't have to hear them.
But here's what's interesting.
What?
That in the 1850 census, you grew up in Washington, D.C. Your family had always lived in Washington, D.C., at least for the two generations. And the Washington, D.C. was a very segregated city at that time. Is that
And
correct?
nobody complained. Not even the colored.
But here's what's interesting. Your grandfather, on the 1850 census record, it lists that your grandfather and your grandmother were colored.
Who says this?
So no, I'm
The
just
census?
the census, and what I'm saying
I
to
don't
you
care
is,
what the census
but
says.
wait a
It's
minute.
not true.
Okay. You haven't even let me finish the question.
wrong?
because
I don't
how-
have to listen to you.
No, you don't have to listen. But the fact is that, and we're going to put the photo up on the screen for the audience to see, because as an African American person, I'm pretty sure you look like a few of my relatives, and
Am I supposed to take that as a compliment?
Yes.
No.
It is a compliment.
No, you're not supposed to take it as a compliment, because what did you do? You spent your law enforcement career really terrorizing African American people, and you
Some people need to be terrorized.
you terrorize gay people also.
Like, is that such a bad thing? They
Well,
need to be terrorized.
but
They're undermining the morality of this country.
But
And you weren't?
but Mr.
No,
Rick,
I was defending the morality
you're
of this
sitting
country,
next
honey.
you're sitting next to an African American marshal. Now, my question for Mr. Reeves, and he might not even want to comment on this, but the question that I would have for you is that the fact that being African American and the fact that Mr. Hoover spent so much of his career terrorizing African Americans, and there's pretty solid evidence to indicate that he himself was African American. I would like to ask Mr. Reeves if he would comment on the fact that during your career, you made, I believe, 3,000 arrests.
Sounds right.
You were never shot.
Well, I got shot at a fair bit.
I'm sure you did. I'm sure you did.
That's that right there is the problem. See, most people think that getting shot at is a problem, and I've certainly never enjoyed it. But from what I've been able to gather, getting shot at is far better than getting shot.
Yes. Yes.
We would agree. We would agree.
Yes.
But you made 3,000 arrests. You're sitting next to what was the country's highest ranking law enforcement officer, and I believe in your entire career. How many arrests did you make, Mr. Hoover?
Oh, many more than 3,000.
No, arrests that he made himself.
Oh, 0.
Yes.
I had an agency of top-notch agents doing it for me.
Right.
How does that count? And plus, I must point out, I introduced science into law enforcement.
Kudos.
A magnificent forensic laboratory for ballistics and chemical analysis, and a big, huge library of fingerprints.
Well,
don't tell
no,
me that's not something.
So
It was something.
Mr. Reeves, you were getting ready to ask a question?
Make a
you
comment.
never in the bureau. Do they hog tie?
Wow.
Hog tie. Like
I heard the term.
I'm pretty sure you were familiar with hog tying.
have you ever hog tied a man?
What kind of pervert do you think I am?
I don't understand your
A
answer.
regular pervert, I think. The usual kind.
Hog tie. You never had to.
No.
Have you ever been hog tied?
I think he's blushing. Marshall Reeves, I think the reason that Babette and I are sitting here and chuckling somewhat is because the reference to hog tying could mean a practice that Mr. Hoover would have engaged in his private life. Could have engaged in his private life.
How the hell would you know, girlie?
So you arrest people even when you're not on the clock?
He
I have a reputation. Don't worry.
This sounds to me like a
arrests
hard-working law enforcement agent.
24/7.
Damn right we are.
And you want to understand why we're picking on him?
365.
I don't.
You
see
think we're
any
picking
point.
on him?
When you're talking about exemplary dedication to duty, I mean,
That's what the FBI is about, son.
have you? So you have been decorated then?
The President of the United States and the whole country recognize my work and my agency's work.
Well, did they recognize? I'm sorry, I'll let you go on.
So, well, I see things change in time.
Yes.
I don't know. So, what would you say is the fanciest decoration you ever received?
A citation from the President of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower, for
Was it chiffon?
Chiffon?
Oh,
what's
I'm
this
sorry.
chiffon?
It's a fabric. It's a fabric.
I heard of chiffon. What's this about chiffon?
I
Is
just
that like
wanted.
for fancy britches.
You
You had stuff on presidents' private lives, apparently, and they were afraid to cross you because you would expose it. However, people had things on your private life
What
as well.
things?
Chiffon.
Again with the chiffon.
Well, let's go. You, for instance, never acknowledged that there was anything in this country called an organized crime syndicate.
Because there wasn't.
Well,
What?
that you insisted that the mafia didn't exist, for instance.
Because it didn't.
This lawman knew better than that. That's why he made all those arrests.
Well, I don't know. I never heard of a mafia, but all the crime that I've seen, a fair bit of it's been organized. Most of the time, it's rather haphazard, of course.
Well, over in the East, where they did things more neatly, it was better organized.
Some of these rustling outfits, they coordinated pretty good.
So did the robber barons, so did the banks that ripped people off, so did the oil people. They were great.
See, I guess, yes, and I this is the thing that Babette and I have talked about when we were discussing this show, and that is that a lot of the things that people were arrested for in terms of being involved with crime were crimes that were committed by people such as Mr. Rockefeller, just on a larger scale. I mean, you do know that there's some, and perhaps you do not know this, that there is some, at least a few people that believe that Mr. Rockefeller, the money that he used as his table stakes to get into the oil business actually came from the fact that he had a previous history as a train robber and a bank robber.
Where do you get this?
Oh,
Well-
my goodness gracious me. First of all, let me tell you that in terms of committing crimes during my era in my company,
Yes.
we couldn't have because there was no law. In order to commit a crime, you have to break a law. At that point, the law was not
Sometimes.
established. So we were able to do what we wanted to do in a business-like manner. The fact that two people in Florida, two young people in Florida, compared us to Jesse James, was proven absolutely a lie by Mr. Hoover.
But you and Mr. Hoover were at least on friendly terms. I mean, you had lunch together whenever you were in Washington
Frequently,
D.C. You
yes.
frequently had lunch,
Yes.
and
Don't you call that a conflict of interest?
Well, no, because we
Of
didn't
course
discuss.
not, because you were involved.
No, you didn't know what we discussed at lunch. First of all, most of the things
You were
we
his
discussed-
friend, and he was looking at your criminal,
He was-
supposed
No,
criminal
he-
activity,
That's not true.
and he exonerated you? Well, that's a big
What-
surprise.
That was a different issue entirely. What we discussed at lunch was the gossip of what was going on in Washington at the time.
It
And
doesn't
also-
matter.
Wait a minute. And also what was happening in the oil business. Nothing criminal, nothing, nobody
You
was...
don't have to. You were his friend, and he
And the
was
Supreme
supposed
Court-
to
did he have
enforcing-
investments? Did Mr. Hoover?
What?
Did you have any investments? Did you have any stock in the oil industry?
Well, what if I did?
Aha,
What if I did?
there you go.
I was good to.
You were
Let
good
me
to
say.
him.
Let me say that Mr. Rockefeller and people like him, like I said before, were building up the country with their industry, whereas I was trying to prevent those radicals who were trying to destroy the country.
So, was it against the law then to be black? Was it against the law to be Jewish? Was it against the law to be
Gay?
homosexual?
It's against the law to. It's against the law to break the law. Okay.
Except for you and your buddy here.
Which one?
Sometimes you have to break the law to
You
enforce
the
the law.
buddy,
Well, I mean,
Rockefeller.
it just
What? Wait a minute. Sometimes you have to break the law to enforce the law.
Yes, you're getting it. You're
But there
getting
was
it.
no law at that point.
There was
in
no
the oil
antitrust
business.
law, I understand.
there was no
Yeah.
antitrust law.
Well,
We understand that.
That didn't happen until the Supreme Court made the decision, the Cleveland massacre, which made 30 people multi-millionaires.
Oh, well, now, and I'm happy that you brought that up again, because the interesting thing about the Cleveland massacre is that obviously you were able to buy up all of these other businesses at reduced rates. And when the government realized, because you would take Standard Oil from, I think you started in Ohio
Like Cleveland.
and Cleveland, and then you would go to other states because there was constant litigation against Standard Oil, and you would just pick Standard Oil up and move to another jurisdiction. You got away with that for a long time until we had the Interstate Commerce Commission and the Interstate Commerce Act, which then all of a sudden it didn't behoove you financially to move from one jurisdiction
And
to
then
the
the
other.
Fed- because
I
the
have to
feds
quarrel
took
with
care
you
of it.
About that we got away with it for a very long time. Number one, we didn't commit a crime at that point because there was no law
Right.
prohibiting it.
And no, and
And
when we get
that's-
to our, because I have to stop you there because we have time constraints, but when we come back, we are going to be able to discuss exactly what happened and how gasoline came on the scene and what it did for you and your company. So I thank you for bringing that up, and this has been a fast conversations across time. This has been a fast conversation for us, and we do hope you will come back next week. We're going to stay, and you'll be able to see that episode next week. So please come back to see the second half of this exciting conversation. Thank you so much. Good night.
Conversations across time.
Hope you enjoyed the show. The issues raised in this show are current today. The unscrupulous tactics of business, as illustrated by John D. Rockefeller, and the abuse of power by business. The illegal surveillance of American citizens, as illustrated by J. Edgar Hoover. Today we have the greed of Wall Street and the illegal surveillance under the Patriot Act. They both harken back to the days of John D. Rockefeller and J. Edgar Hoover.